So I seen on Fox News that my president and still your president, Donald J. Trump, held yet again just a beautiful gaslighting conference. And during the conference, he talked about a couple, 2-3 ways we could use to help to defeat this whole coronavirus thing. And one of the things he talked about was maybe the virus could be defeated by an intense light source such as the sun or other artificial means. And I couldn't agree more, which is why I went ahead and booked me an appointment down at my local tanning salon. Shout out to Bronze Buns. But I'm going to go get me a glow job. I got an hour booked in the tanning bed, and then I'm going to get me spray tan just to be safe and look presidential. But the other thing that Mr. Trump said that we could use to help defeat this whole coronavirus was injecting disinfectants. And I got some right here, Clorox, and we got Lysol. So I went ahead and took the liberty. I got a syringe full of Lysol, and you can see right there. But I got these syringes because I got diabetes on the count. I was in the Cola Wars. That's right, I'm a veteran. You're welcome for my service. I got PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But I've seen enough wrestling documentaries to know the best place to take one of these shots is in the ass cheek. And that's the only thing I'm going to take in the ass, by the way. But I figure, I'm willing to be a guinea pig for my country to help save American lives. What's the worst that can happen? I end up like Captain America. So today I'm raising my emotional support beer to my president, Donald J. Trump, for warning us about everything. Cancer-causing windmills, telling us about injecting Lysol into our bodies. And as always, fuck the NFL and go Coats. Brenda, go ahead and fill me up another syringe of Lysol. So I seen on Fox News that my president and still your president.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? This is Nick Humphrey with us, and Jennifer Hynes is with us. I'm just going to get the names together in the right places on the screen. And Antonio Reid was supposed to join us. He hasn't come yet, but we hope you enjoyed that little funny. Okay, and it was. And basically, I want to say something before we go any farther with that funny. I don't think that Donald J. Trump was telling people to drink bleach, Lysol, or any of it. I honestly think that Donald J. Trump cannot communicate properly. And what he might think is an injectable medicine, he sees that injectables cure cancer and people inject things for diabetes. And he sees that light. Maybe Melania uses some kind of laser light for some procedure, and it doesn't come out right. Honestly, the guy has very broken thinking. So that's. I'm not going to sit there and say he was telling people to go drink Clorox, okay? But Brett was funny. So good evening, guys. I'm really hoping that Antonio joins us. We have a good show, and we've chosen some topics we thought that would depress everybody even worse. No, more than we are already. I don't know, but we've got a great group on YouTube, and I think that you, Nick, are ready to roll. I'm going to test something, guys, and I'm going to see if this works. I want to see when I put up the screen what we look like. Oh, look at that. It really does work. So Nick tonight he's not actually going to read an article. I'm just playing around with the screen, but he's going to talk about the first article, which was the warmest oceans ever on record. Yeah. Okay, so you go. I'm done. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Glad to be on yet again. The oceans are looking like they're going to have yet another year where they may near or reach record warmth across the world. There are many parts of the Pacific and the Atlantic and Indian Oceans are already seeing near or record warm temperatures right now, and that may be reflected in some of what we're already seeing in terms of extreme weather events. Today, the first recorded tropical cyclone to develop in the Northeast Pacific in the month of April formed today, far from the coast of Mexico. So that was very notable and over abnormally warm ocean waters. We're also seeing the past 2 or 3 weeks very active weather pattern in the southeast U.S. with damaging storms and tornado outbreaks, and that has been fed by very, very warm waters for this time of year in the Gulf of Mexico, with tons of moisture sweeping up into portions of Texas and Oklahoma and the southeast, deep south U.S., helping to fuel the storms in those regions for the past 2 or 3 weeks now. So basically, what global warming is really much of it is ocean warming. It's the warming of the, particularly of the top 2,000 meters or so of the ocean is warming dramatically as greenhouse gases in the atmosphere grow and more heat is retained.
Mm-hmm.
Much of that heat goes into the ocean. Over 90% of that heat goes into the ocean. And so if you look at land warming versus ocean warming, almost, particularly the past decade, almost every single year has been the warmest on record compared to the previous year for the oceans alone, which is extremely consistent. But it's consistent because there's so much heat that's pouring into the oceans, and when you get that, it can feed back and produce extreme heat on the land by enhancing high pressure systems, these huge, what we call anticyclones that sit over the same area for weeks to months at a time. It can produce not only extreme heat, but just drought conditions.
Wow.
And we've been seeing that, in fact, over much of the southeast U.S. and the Caribbean since last fall. I mean, we had extreme heat, record heat going into October in portions of the southeast U.S. and Mexico, Cuba, and dryness has continued through the winter for many areas. And it's typical to have a dry season in the winter in the subtropics of the Caribbean, in the Gulf of Mexico. But it's been very dry in parts of Florida are having drought conditions, Mexico, Cuba. In Cuba, in fact, I believe it's the second year in a row they broke their maximum temperature record last week, with temperatures over 100 degrees in portions of Cuba.
Yeah.
So
Florida,
Florida
was hot.
Yeah, and Florida was very hot.
Insane.
I believe Miami had a record high of 97 degrees a few days ago. So very, very high temperatures for the April months. And Mexico has also dealt with temperatures going into the 100, well over 100 degrees. I believe it may have even gone over 110 in the Yucatan Peninsula. I'd have to check that again. But, I mean, just very high temperatures for this time of year. And the Southwest U.S. is also dealing with near record temperatures in Phoenix and other areas. So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, the context of this is you get the ocean, and 70% of the surface area of the Earth is just covered in ocean. When you have the oceans, top of the ocean warming so dramatically,
right,
it impacts the atmospheric air patterns. It impacts ecosystems that live in the ocean. It impacts the sea ice. The sea ice melts by not just by shrinking in terms of surface area, but also thinning. And we're seeing that progressive thinning of the sea ice, and eventually, probably later in this decade, we'll see the first blue ocean event in the Arctic, where it'll just be blue ocean in the middle of summer.
In the middle of that, summer. for them.
Yeah, Northern Hemisphere is summer. So it's
Wow.
so I mean the oceans play a huge role. A lot of people don't think about the oceans because we sit in the atmosphere, which is our ocean of sorts, but the water is very dominant feature on this planet. It's an ocean planet, and so if you have record warm oceans every single year for the past several years, or almost the past several years, that means that you are dramatically altering everything that the ocean is connected to. Again, the atmosphere, the biosphere, the ecosystems that live near the shorelines, and the climates on the land, on the land masses themselves. So it's very, very consequential what we're witnessing right now.
I would say.
Nice and depressing start.
Well, it's look, what are we going to do? This is what we're here to talk about. I mean, the article was pretty good, and you encapsulated what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And then we can go on to that lovely one that I think you had put it up in our chat, was the coronavirus pandemic will cause global famines of biblical proportions.
Yeah, I think the primary reasons for that are dealing with they're calling it recession, but really it's a depression that appears to be developing in the economy, and in the lack of food aid that will not come to many countries because of just countries unable to afford to do it anymore, or choosing not to do it anymore because their economies are tanking so badly, and so a lot of people could face starvation all around the world. In more vulnerable countries, Africa obviously comes up a lot. Yemen, I know, is having that horrific war going on. So I think it kind of highlights how fragile the system really is. It's one of the reasons I looked at this and it was like a virus is doing this, and it's like, well, with climate change, you're going to have a lot of viruses starting to spread all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them could come out of the permafrost as it progressively melts over the course of the century. You may have existing viruses that exist in the tropics that begin to spread, like malaria and dengue fever and some of the other ones, because of warming climates in the mid latitudes. So the viruses that love those kind of climate regimes, those tropical climates, they'll be able to spread north because they're vectors, the mosquitoes and other organisms, be able to spread them to those countries. So it's a very fragile system where all you have to have is one black swan event or thing happen, and everything tanks because of it. And suddenly you're dealing with a food crisis in the vulnerable countries. You're dealing with a climate change crisis in the vulnerable countries. And next 10 years, we're going to be dealing with everything from 10 or 15 years, dealing with everything from perhaps more pandemic phenomenon happening. Sea level rise is going to continue to accelerate. Storms are going to become more extreme. And I mean, this particular pandemic isn't so much linked to climate change as far as anyone can tell, but it's linked to environmental degradation and human encroachment on habitat and wildlife, and bringing that wildlife into the human environment, slaughtering it in unsanitary conditions, in people that are in those markets being exposed to the virus and animal to human transmission. And then, of course, the virus was able to evolve very quickly and go from animal to human to human to human. So And
Yeah,
obviously
I
to get,
watched quite a bit on that. I did
yeah,
quite a bit of research on that, and because the last video I put together, I did have some information on the etiology of that virus. So
Mm,
yeah.
remember, Jen
yeah.
had Catherine
Yeah.
Hayhoe in it.
Did
So
did you guys hear about that lab in Wuhan that was studying coronavirus in bats, right? And that's how it got out. It got out of a laboratory in Wuhan. It isn't like, I don't think it really came from that seafood market per se. They say it came from that seafood market, but they were actually studying this virus in Wuhan, and they had cited, there was a article about it, and they had cited that there were dangerous, they weren't being safe, and that thing escaped. And of course it started in Wuhan. Did you hear anything about
oh,
that
I've
one,
read about
Sandy?
that, but I don't have definitive background research or information to commit to that story. But it does sound plausible because we do research with China all the time in all kinds of area. Even my institution that I worked at, we had a Center for China Studies. We had people come back and forth. We sent people to Beijing, and my boss had been to Beijing like 10 times. I mean, it was a very robust research. We had a researcher in our office. When she came to us, she was researching chemistry and toxicology, but she had prior worked on the tamoxifen medication for breast cancer. So
Mm,
it's not always a negative to do that kind of collaboration. But again, I don't, Jennifer, but that could be something we could delve into
mhm.
because I don't know if
I'll
anybody
have
has
the
it.
article. I
Yeah.
posted it on my Facebook page.
Okay.
I don't think it was a collaboration. I think it was actually Chinese scientists doing a
Yep.
study on this Wuhan virus.
Well, there's a
But
lot to
that's what
find
Yeah,
out.
I heard.
yeah. I've been, when, well, it's hard to flesh out. Like I've seen at least one. Well, there was one peer-reviewed paper that where they suggested that they didn't see evidence, because I guess there's certain, when it comes to um, um, manufacturing, if you will, of a virus, manipulating a virus, there's certain signatures that you can look for to see um, that that's been sort of tampered with by humans in some way. But I don't understand all of
Mm,
that. But they suggest that it wasn't um, directly created in a lab. It certainly may have been studied in one, and they may have
mhm,
had a concentrated um, amount of that virus. And obviously, if there was an accident, they would never tell us the truth on such a thing.
Well, Patrick
Because,
McNulty says it's a bioweapon. Patrick, I don't think it's a
yeah,
bioweapon, but
no,
I don't live in the
I
paranoid
don't think it's a
universe.
I don't think it's a bioweapon, because it would be a pretty bad bioweapon, because most of the people that get it don't seem to get sick from it. um, Although that would make it easy to spread, but
mhm,
um, but I think what it is that until there's more definitive evidence, I think it is something that came from nature. It seems to have certain aspects to it that suggest it's from nature. A lot of the coronaviruses come from bats, and bats,
Hmm.
in some cases, um, also have it in their and other mammals that catch such viruses have it in their gut. And there's been evidence of humans, when they catch it, actually getting sick in their gut, so they actually get diarrhea and other symptoms
Ugh.
that have nothing to do with their respiratory system initially,
Yeah.
but then it spreads to their respiratory system later.
It's pretty
Um,
nasty
uh,
if
yeah, I
if
mean,
you
it's
get it badly.
yeah. So
Ooh.
I stick with that being the most plausible explanation for now, and it's just because, I mean, a real bioweapon, they make it so that it will really infect, and I would imagine they would make it so that it's really infectious, but also really lethal. And this
mhm.
virus doesn't seem to have that aspect. It seems to be one that lives off of just spreading everywhere. It just
Yeah.
gets everywhere.
Anybody in the chat want to contribute? I thought we would do we'll do every so often when we do this. We would have a little time for, let's see, Jilly's with us. Spreads, targets the most vulnerable, not a weapon. She's asking questions. I don't, we won't know, but Jennifer and I are going to research this. At least the labs. I'm fascinated with the kinds of research that these universities do because there's so much of it. Grateful Heretic. Why couldn't it be a kinder, gentler, social engineered bioweapon? I don't throw logic out with the bathwater. There's a whole mountain of evidence with daily avalanches up to our necks already. So, okay, everybody's giving us feedback, Jen, and that could be something. And you know what, Nick, if you want to be in on it too. I wish I knew where Antonio, what happened to him.
Folks need to remember, and it's going to become, unfortunately, increasingly apparent as humans encroach into habitat more, and the permafrost melts more. Nature can make weapons. Its own weapons.
I guess you're right. And nature making weapons is kind of like the people taking advantage of that. Taking advantage of nature-made weapons. Nature-made! Yeah, there you go. So, copy Cooney. Oh, Christ, here come the tinfoil hats. No! We're just, no tinfoil hats. What we're doing is just having a conversation. Listen, there's research that goes on in Wuhan, whether it's bats or not. It would be interesting to know what kind of research. Like I said, I mean, we had. I'll tell you a little quick story about. We had one gal who was with the Communist Party, but she was here working on a research project with. The professor that had it here, she was cool as shit. When she left, I bought the car she had bought to ride around here. I mean, I hung out with these people. They were great. They were fun. And even though they had a completely different lifestyle, they would get an apartment in Buffalo, and we went over and we learned how to cook and do things with these professors. They were awesome. So everything is not nefarious. Everything is not horrible. And that's what I'm trying to say. There's no tinfoil hat. There's just inquisitive nature here. Okay. So, I will, okay. The Grateful Heretic, the tinfoil isn't going to do you any good. You better get the lead sheeting out. All right. Well, at that one, we will now go on to, Jennifer, if you want to, Jennifer's our methane gal. She's always covering the stuff, even if it's not methane in the Arctic. She is our methane reporter. So I'm going to pull up that little article on methane and what's happening in the Permian and get rid of our names again, because I can't figure out how to make these things just not do this all the time. Okay, so Jennifer, this article is the desmog. So take it away.
Absolutely. The desmog one, is that what you said?
Yes. Do you have that one up?
Yep.
You have the other one also. I didn't have it. You want to zip me the link?
No.
Okay.
I've got it. So, everything's about perception, right? I mean, we've been talking about methane in the Arctic a long time, but we haven't really talked, except very sporadically, about methane leakage from natural gas. And that is happening, and it's a lot worse than people thought it was. And so we're going to delve into this a little bit right now. And this is in the Permian Basin region, which is in Texas. It's a big area, and the reason they call it the Permian Basin, it is the largest deposit and the thickest deposit of Permian rock on the earth. And it came about in the Permian Age when Gondwana or whatever was that continent with Africa and Europe and everything kind of smashed against North America, and this big lump of continental rock came up in Texas, and it happens to be really, really rich in natural gas, also rich in oils. Actually, one of the biggest oil producers in the United States. But lately, they've been taking a look at it, and they can see so much of it coming off. And Sandy, there's a couple of videos. Let me see. There's a video down there that you can see. Coal mining may release more methane than oil and gas. So that's what they're coming to. They're realizing, it's so much deception.
Which one?
Well, you can just down in that article, in the DSMOG article, you'll see it inside there.
Do you want to play one? Should I play it?
Yeah, and I don't think it has any noise. I think it's just...
Well, let's see how it looks, just so we know that if it actually will come out and work well. Let's see how it looks.
Okay.
Why not?
Okay.
We might as well try something,
There it is.
All I can do is screw it up. All right.
And in the other article, too, there's some really amazing videos. So they are seeing this with satellite data, and they're able to see how much methane is leaking out of these natural gas plants. And it's really, really big. A lot more than previously thought, of course.
I can't turn the volume down on the music.
Oh, has it got volume on it?
Yeah. Do you guys hear the volume? Well, we don't have to look at the whole thing. It's in the article, guys, if you want to look at it.
It's there. It'll be in the show notes.
Yep. And absolutely. And I just really wanted to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, I'll put Gus back on.
There's another one in the next article that's also really good, and it's actually more dramatic. It's got colors.
Wow.
So new research based on satellite data confirms that oil and gas industry in the Permian region of Texas and New Mexico is leaking record amounts of methane. The new research published in the Journal of Science Advances found that methane emissions in the Permian Basin were equivalent to 3.7% of the total methane produced by the oil and gas there. That's a lot of leakage. In December, DSMOG reported on the work of Robert Howarth, a biochemist at the Cornell University who had been studying methane emissions of the oil and gas industry. His latest research estimates that 3.4% of all natural gas produced from the shale is leaked through the production cycle. So there's just so much leakage. So much leakage. And it's kind of shocking, actually. There's another article as well, Sandy, that I think has...
Yeah, I didn't pull it up. But you can read it. I didn't.
Okay.
I forgot to put it in the heading.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's two methane articles, actually. So this one is... also along the same lines, just came out today, and this is from CBS News. And again, satellite images. This thing is making its rounds around the news cycle. Reveal a huge amount of methane leaking from U.S. oil fields. And
it's like we didn't know they were flaring them, but now we know they're leaking too. Oh boy,
they're really leaking, and that's the thing. I mean. They have just found so much is leaking, about 60% higher than the national average leakage rate. So it's leaking more than they thought.
Wow.
Methane is a potent greenhouse gas. And since the Permian Basin is so large, this excess waste is a significant contribution to our already warming climate. So there is a very dramatic, they have different lenses that can see the methane, and it's just pouring out of all these methane things, and it's kind of amazing. And there was a blowout, every so often. You guys remember Porter Ranch when that blew out? There was another blowout, I believe, in Ohio.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Porter Ranch.
Right. Yeah, Porter Ranch. And so there have been just a number of blowouts, and all of these leakage, blowouts, all these things, it's not only a big waste of natural resources, but it is a very powerful heat trapping greenhouse gas, much more so than CO2. So about 125 times or roughly so. It's, even though there's 225 times less methane in the atmosphere than there is CO2, its heat trapping qualities are contributing 25% of the current rate of global warming. So 25%, yeah, 25% of our warming is actually coming from methane. So we're always talking about, how many CO2 molecules, parts per million are there, and we're over 400, but that's just CO2. Another 25% of the warming that we're experiencing is coming directly from methane. So this guy, Dr. Robert Howarth, says he's very concerned about these increasing methane emissions because they're not staying steady. That's the other thing. They're going straight up.
Nick, can I ask you a question? So, Nick, with all this methane going straight up, and just to segue a little, how does that affect the weather patterns? How does methane interact? Again, I'm sure we've talked about this, but just to recap.
Yeah, well, I mean the unless you have like a major eruption of methane, like something that has been hypothesized could happen from the Arctic or something like that, it's not going to affect the immediate weather. But I mean, over multiple decades, if you're having these significant venting of methane, increasing from the Arctic, increasing from the tropics and the soils, increasing from industrial sources. I mean, a lot of the methane, that increase in methane since the late 2000s, a lot of that clearly is coming from industrial growth and oil prospecting, fracking.
Wow.
Everything that's going on. This is huge desire for natural gas. That's supposedly supposed to be clean. It's not.
After watching Michael Moore's movie, I think that nothing is clean. But I knew this before. Yeah. I mean, we knew this before.
Yeah, I mean, industrial growth spurs pollution, which destroys ecosystems and causes global warming. I mean, it's a major factor, obviously, in climate change, and so it affects the weather in the future. And what's been done in the previous decades is affecting the weather now. And so you have to, when you do these kind of behaviors, you have to think about the future, but nobody thinks about the future. Everyone thinks about the present and feeding industrial machine and the energy that we all living on this planet demand for not just our survival, but our perception of what we are supposed to have and growth and everything. And of course, that growth is misallocated because here in the U.S. we have ridiculous amounts of overabundance, and then you go to other countries and they have a ridiculous small amount of abundance. That's why we discuss this pandemic causing famine. Like, how is this pandemic causing famine when it's not even making all those people sick, because they were already in a very very tenuous position as it is. Well, you add in climate change, you add in environmental degradation, then it obviously gets worse for them. But yeah, I mean, going back to the weather, the weather of now is a result of what was done to the ground 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago to extract the oil and the natural gas. That's what we're dealing with now. And what we're doing today will be an impact on our weather in 10 years, 20 years from now. So Yeah.
That's
Jennifer,
right.
you've talked about that before too. The
Yeah,
fact that
that's the lag time. That's the lag time
hmm
for carbon dioxide to attain its full heating potential. It takes a long time for that thing to reach its bubbling, boiling rate, you know.
yep.
And so it's baked in, and so we, you know, no matter what happens, we're going to be experiencing heating from carbon dioxide emissions that have already been emitted for the next, you know, 10 to 15 years before that emissions level gets realized,
Kent says
you
this
know.
fall's going
But
to be a reality check, Jen. Kent.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's pretty damn scary. It really is. And what makes it this methane escaping in this Permian Basin area of Texas, and I think it's kind of ironic
hmm
that they're calling it the Permian Basin because, of course, the
Yeah.
Permian mass extinction
Yeah.
252 million years ago.
Yeah.
This is actually the same rock that was formed right then, so it's kind of funny.
That
But
extincted it
it
in
is
us.
it is the methane gas is so excessive, and it has tripled the heating impact it would have otherwise had through the burning of gas. So they're being, you know, it's a problem to you know, tap this and frack this gas, right? It's really a big problem, and it's a
Job.
gas, so it's really hard to contain it, and it can have blowouts, and it can just leak if the things aren't, you know, connected really tightly. They all leak, and you know, so they've been touting natural gas as the clean
Yeah.
you know, the clean solution. It isn't clean. There's nothing
No.
clean about it. It's actually more destructive than coal if it's leaking.
And we have an
And
article on
that's,
coal.
yeah, yeah.
You're right, though. None of it's good. I mean, I've always said this. No source of energy since we became industrialized is good. It's all destructive. That's it. You know, it's all destructive. It's all fucked up. But I'm sorry. Oops. I'm going to pull up this one article. Um, this was one that Antonia was going to do, and it's this is Manga Bay and the
Hmm.
state of the planet. So this is on the brink of a coal boom. Papuans ask who will benefit. So will a new mining industry plan for Papua repeat an old story of dispossession and environmental degradation? So across Indonesia, a huge and poorly regulated coal industry has generated enormous wealth for investors, but left local people behind to deal with the impacts of environmental degradation. Isn't that how it always happens? The country's easternmost Papua region has several untapped coal reserves, but the central government is working on a plan to open it for coal mining. An investigation into the coal industry in Horna on the Bird's Head Peninsula of the island of New Guinea reveals that a company granted exploration rights in the area is closely connected to local and national power players. So it is corrupt like everywhere else. This will be corrupted. It'll be built. The indigenous people, they will get screwed. And even though the Indonesia's in the grips of a coal boom, because it is one of the biggest exporters, they're just this Jocko Widodo. They want to keep making electricity just proliferate. They want to be the coal people. So it's just sad to me that all the time it is who that gets hurt, and
Yeah.
they said, "Go ahead,
I just going off for a second. I
go
think
ahead, I'm
that
done."
um, this is where like scientists like they that are very hopeful that we can turn things around are very naive. You know, to me, the power of of wealth and money supplants everything, and I mean it supplants everything to the point that it takes over the economy, takes over politics, it takes over the entire social structure, so that you never the change that you need that would give us either somehow a chance to turn things around, or at least a chance to not suffer the consequences nearly as quickly, are fundamentally are fundamentally different from money and power and super wealth and class system. And so it's in order to do that, you would have to literally overthrow those people. But nobody wants to do that because, well, lots of people want to do it, but lots of people don't, because they think they can be like that themselves in the future. And so lots of countries, there's people that are legitimately in poverty that are like, well, we want what the U.S. wants. Why do we have to be in this position of poverty? In a way, they're correct, but the problem is environmentally, you can't do that because the U.S. and many other countries that have all of this wealth and money and power have exploited the world so severely that now, if you want to be like us, you have to destroy the world even more to do it. Is it the fault of those people to want more than they have? No, because they've been clearly exploited. We've gotten wealthier, and the super wealthy in this country have gotten super wealthy at the expense of us, but severely at the expense of the people that live in those third world countries,
Absolutely,
those developing countries. And
well, that's who's
the world's been destroyed. It's been so severely degraded that now you can't even try to raise yourself to a level that might be considered in this country middle class, because it would destroy the world even more. It's I've had people on my Facebook weather page get into arguments about so how do you do social justice, basically over social justice versus the fundamental human problems of like population growth. Is it a population problem? Is it an overconsumption problem? Is it the fault of everybody equally, or is it just the fault of people in the developed world? And I see these conflicts erupt because it's a conundrum of how do you fundamentally deal with the fact that your world is degraded, and whose fault is it, or does fault even matter? And I mean, I could go into my view on it, but
go ahead.
I mean, my view is that it's both a overpopulation and overconsumption problem, but it's not fundamentally the fault of people in the poorest countries that never really had a chance to even develop their own resources because they were abused by those that colonized them, conquered them, enslaved them, and in some ways they're still enslaving them, taking their resources and then leaving them with nothing, as you just talked about with the coal industry. But the world is becoming so burned out, with climate change, with pollution, with environmental degradation, that it leaves everyone on the earth no chance, regardless of how super wealthy or super poor you are, to really have much of a future. The rich will try to eke it out longer, of course, because they have the resources to build their bunkers and all this other nonsense that they do. But it's a fact of our fate. Not all of us are at fault for the fate that we're facing, but everyone's fate is the same.
Well, yeah. Our fate is we're born to die. I mean, it's what we do on the way to get there. And my whole existence has been the growth and the perversion of capitalism. I mean, my generation, has been the growth and
Yeah.
perversion of it. And your generation, Nick, is having to suffer some of the consequences of the excesses of our generation and our addiction to fossil fuels and waking up too late. I mean, it is. I'm not saying like Jennifer and I are horrible people. We just lived in a society that, well, did we know any better? I mean, we have been propagandized for 50 years horribly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so thank God so many people are awake, and we're fighting against being propagandized. Totally.
Yeah.
Well, so Jen, are you in the
Mm-hmm.
mood to talk about the well, let's see how long we've been on. Oh, we're there. About the policymakers on the manga based series, about it's an older one, but it is about the wake up, burning trees for energy is not carbon neutral. And that kind of folds into, if everybody did see, I don't know, did everybody see the Michael Moore piece? And if you didn't, it's not going to be a
Yeah.
spoiler. We're just
Planet of the Humans.
Planet of the
Planet of
Humans.
the Humans is such a good movie. I've just watched it for the second time.
Mm-hmm.
Brand new documentary executive produced by Michael Moore, and quite revealing. And I have to say, I was really taken aback at how big the biomass industry is. I had no idea, to be honest with you. I hadn't really ever focused on biomass.
I didn't think
And
it
I
was
was
like
also
this.
super disappointed about the positions of our so-called leaders in the ecological movements, like Al Gore and Bill McKibben. I was terribly disappointed. And I was like, God, these guys, I mean, they're supposed to be leaders and kind of showing the way and inspiring people, but they're doing the biomass. And the biomass, just
It's
FYI, in
horrible.
case you guys don't know, it's basically killing trees, grinding them up into, wood, and then burning it. I mean, this is insanity. Trees are the only thing that
I'm
takes,
going to
one
put
of the
up
only
this.
things that
Yeah.
carbon out of the atmosphere.
It is
And here they
awful.
are.
I
Here they
had
are, just
no
like
idea.
killing all these trees. It is so sad. I hate killing trees. I just, and just all these, film footage of all these trees that are just clear cut and then ground up. And then
may
when
I
they were
say,
talking about the
not
oil
home firewood.
industry of the animals, I was like, oh my God, this world
Overwhelming.
is so messed up.
Right. But it's
And
not
it's like,
home firewood to
there's
say
no way
that.
out. And that's just like the depressing thing, Sandy. It's just like, I mean, that was a really, really good expose on the entire falseness of the biomass promise. It sounds great. Oh, green energy. But then you start to realize you could start to focus on supposedly green industries, like natural gas was supposed to be a less harmful thing. Bullshit, right? The whole thing. It's just so corrupt, and they're just going to take the planet down come hell or high water.
Well, you know what it is? Somebody wrote in Gore is a great man. Read his book, Earth and Balance. The thing is, you can be a great person, but he's still a capitalist. And and there was still money to be made. And that was what is the crux of the movie, and that's what Corey Morningstar has been writing in her exposés for how long, and others. So it is just a more mainstream, in your face showing of what's going on behind the scenes. And again, Jen, I agree with you. And I don't know, Nick, the biomass is like, I mean, it must be hitting us.
It's like medieval, like
It is.
industrialized medieval energy, just burning wood.
Yeah. I mean, we heat our house with wood, but it's like the wood that fell from a tornado. And I feel so guilty after watching it, though, because we don't. There's biomass here in New York, And
I
my
mean,
husband and I sit and we watch this big truck go down the road. And we have been watching for a long time. And I say, what the hell? I thought it was going to the lumber mill. Now I know better. Now I'm going to trace I'm going to trace this. I'm going to research this because now I'm really piqued. I want to know, where's the wood going? Is our county selling it to these biofuel plants? It sucks. But this article is it's pretty good, from Manga Bay, which is an excellent publication. And it says it's U.S. and UN and policymakers wake up. It's from 2019, but it's illustrative of what we're talking about. Burning trees for energy is not carbon neutral. So I'm going. It's a commentary. I'm going to go down a little bit. Basically, scientists have repeatedly warned that burning forests. It makes me want to throw up just hearing the forest. Burning forests is not carbon neutral, and that doing so puts the world at risk of overshooting Paris. Okay, 1.5. Haven't we overshot that? But the message has fallen on deaf ears, such as lucrative renewable energy subsidies have driven exponential growth in the use of forest wood as funeral. Yeah, it's our fucking funeral. Sorry, whoops.
It
The
sure
world's
is.
nations must stop
Freudian slip.
subsidizing. Subsidizing burning forest biomass now to protect forests, the climate, and our future. So this is a post, it's a commentary. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but we've all watched in horror as the Amazon and other forests have burned. And while burning wood is widely treated as carbon neutral, the physical reality is that burning wood emits more pollution, and it's taking the forests. And they're making all this crap out of it. A special culprit is the European Union, which sets renewable energy policy rules for member states. So despite abundant evidence that biomass and wood pellet industry is trashing forests and increasing carbon emissions, the EU re-upped their renewable energy policy last year to continue subsidizing forest biomass for heat and power. And we here are sending the UK our southern forests. And I don't have to finish reading this and get all upset. You get the drift. This is really bad. I mean, this is not, I did not know, I'll just show, I did not know how in depth this was. I feel like I was asleep and it's happening right in front of my nose. Right in front of my nose.
Basically, this is something a lot of scientists don't really want to admit because they just want to be like, oh, we can just build the renewable energy, the solar panels, and
grow more trees,
and the windmills, all this other stuff. And somehow that won't be industrially destructive, which it is, and that's another discussion. But basically, in order to power a planetary civilization, which is what the world is becoming. I mean, we're still a bunch of countries that bicker amongst each other, but we're increasingly a smaller world, interconnected, as you've seen with this pandemic, how fast it spreads because we're so interconnected with travel and everything else. In order to power a planetary civilization, and this is probably what every civilization in the universe, there are other civilizations that rise in the universe, have dealt with, is you have to use your planet as a battery. I mean, that's what you have to use it as a battery. And so that means not only exploiting every single resource that you can get your hands on that can burn in some capacity, either fire or nuclear fission or whatever it is, it burns to produce energy, but it produces waste. And I don't know if if there's a civilization out there that's going to move on to other planets and else. They somehow dealt with the waste problem, and but it's a there's a problem where you get increasing amounts of waste. That waste causes global warming.
Wait a minute.
Your water. That waste pollutes land. That waste um, basically pollutes the hell out of everything and destroys everything. And of course, the removal of the resources leaves less resources for the next time you need more energy, and your energy needs grow exponentially. So you lose your resources exponentially if the resources can't be replenished at as fast a rate as you're depleting them. I mean, I don't know how you ever expect to be able to have a civilization that can not destroy itself and yet be able to not destroy itself and be able to move on to other places to take resources from like in our solar system, the moon, Mars, the outer planets. How are you going to be able to do that when you're running through your energy stores on your own planet, trying to be this planetary civilization? Because that's basically conundrum. Can you get the resources you need to keep growing and yet not destroy yourself by running through all those resources and drowning in your own pollution?
Yeah. Well, guess what? I mean, I'm interrupting, but Antonio's going to be joining us. Even though we've been an hour, it's a good show. Is everybody having a good time? And I mean, yeah, good time. As much a good time. Antonio Reid's going to be joining us. If we can, I can make sure that this Skype doesn't screw up. I'd love to have feedback. Yay! We want Antonio to join us. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. So it sounded like you were having a pretty intense thing there. So I figure what is Nick saying? What's wrong? I mean, Matt, what's wrong? Actually, somebody's having a conversation in the chat. So maybe I shouldn't jump in the middle. Carry on. And once I hope he Skypes in. Hope it works.
Any thoughts, Jennifer?
Well, I'm just kind of like bummed. I'm really depressed about the way our world is going, and there are no green solutions, even solar panels, it just takes rare earth and, petroleum products and coal in order to even manufacture them. I hate to be such a, Debbie Downer, but, after watching Michael Moore's movie, and I gotta hand it to Michael Moore, he didn't sugarcoat it. A lot of times they're like, they put all these kind of, things out, and then they say, but if we just gather together and do this, we'll be okay. Michael Moore's movie did not say that. He was just like, here's the situation, here's the expose. There are no green solutions. Population is going up too fast, and we're basically screwed. I mean, that was the takeaway from Michael.
And the thing he did not do was what David Wallace Wells, when he wrote his article, David Wallace Wells then had to put in the obligatory hopium at the end, and Jeff and Michael didn't. And the research they did, I looked up and I found articles, again, over 10 years on this biomass how is that stone not unturned by me? I feel like so it opened my eyes there, and I had never seen it. I don't want to be a spoiler for everyone. I'm just waiting for Antonio. Let me see what other articles I also had up. Are you there?
Can you hear me? Do you see me? I'm
here.
Yeah,
we can hear you, and I can add you to. Hello, Antonio. Let me turn off everybody else's name because all the names are in front of you. How are you? Welcome.
I'm doing great. I'm sorry, everybody. I had to deal with a little bit of a medical crisis, but I'm okay, and I'm glad to be here with you guys.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. I'll put your name under you. So tell us what's going on and what would you like to talk about, because we really covered the whole biomass thing, and if there's something that you're itching to talk about, the floor is yours. We've been on an hour, and we'll stay. We'll give you everybody in the audience is happy. We got a good crowd, and here you are, the pièce de résistance.
Well, I will try not to repeat anything that was said previously, but I guess I want to talk about the state of politics and COVID-19.
All right, you can end up with that. That's fine.
That's a good topic. Is that okay?
For you, yeah, we haven't touched it. Anybody disagree?
Go for it.
No, go for it. Yeah.
So, I guess, obviously COVID-19 is the state of the planet right now. Governments across the world have initiated lockdowns. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of tie into this, or the type of thought perspective that I wanted to invoke, was the surrealism in American politics in the display of crisis public policy. So one of the things that I think is interesting, I think that people should focus on as we kind of deal with different crises, whether they be climate crises or pandemic crises or what have you, it's how, our political leadership responds. And in the United States, there's been a total disarray of political leadership. From the very beginning, when the crisis came to the United States, when the pandemic came to the United States, there was little cooperative effort to get a handle on the pandemic in terms of making sure that tests were available, making sure that public health officials had their PPE, and making sure that there was an abundant supply of ventilators that could be easily distributed across the states and their regional hospitals. So we failed doing that. But what I think is most interesting is perhaps, other countries have suffered through political failures due to delay, due to hesitations on thinking about what the impacts will be to the economy and to people's lives. But in the United States, what's particularly interesting is that we have a lot of governors and a lot of statesmen. They're not statesmen? We don't have statesmen in the United States. That's a dead art here. But we have politicians, so we have a lot of politicians that have come to the forefront and who are openly going against our civic institutions. So we have right now a dispute happening in Georgia where, Governor Kemp has come out and has first 2 weeks ago or so denied knowing that asymptomatic people could carry the virus, despite the CDC in his own state making this warning from the very beginning, as far as back as January, and then him saying that he's going to, now that there are more cases, now that there are more deaths in Georgia, he's going to reopen the state.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
So what that says to me is that, in combination, so you have those type of episodes, but in combination what's happening with the so-called national relief or recovery, look at what the Congress is doing. They are de facto creating a secondary crisis within this larger pandemic crisis. This is classic shock doctrine being implemented in the United States. And the way that our Congress is doing that is, firstly, there's a complete, huge redistribution in wealth in our society from the bottom to the top. It almost looks like something from Versailles, leading the French Revolution. And not only that, the so-called peasantry class, the working class, has been left with absolute scraps on this. $1,200 Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, says should last 10 weeks. Okay? So we are now putting people in a crisis where they are not going to have money to buy food to eat. We have told them that the money they have should last them for 10 weeks. And we're in the middle of an economic depression for the likes of which we have not seen.
We didn't get anything, and nothing's going to last us 10 days. I mean, just don't pay your unsecured debt.
22 million or 26 million people are now unemployed. This crisis is really building up, and I think that we've not really understood the repercussions of this, and I don't think we can understand the repercussions of that until at least 3 to 4 months down the road.
Yeah.
Okay, when financial services are slowed, when people exhaust their checks fully, savings are exhausted, and people get desperate. Uh, so I think people really look around what's happening in your city, what's happening in your state, what's happening in your municipality, because the way that we're dealing with this very real crisis today is how we're going to deal with those very real crises tomorrow in 2030.
Okay, how are we going to deal with those crises? It seems like technology. Well, let's see what Matt said. Matt said his idea is to, where is it? To localize TACE enzymes and flooding the body with them, where they will lock down the ACE2 receptors, keeping this virus from being able to fuse. So Matt's thinking medically, and that's kind of cool. I guess I should have Matt on so he can talk about all the medical aspects of it. Antonio, how are you doing?
As far as the medical crisis I was dealing with, it was with one of my clients. It wasn't actually, I wasn't not personally going through a medical crisis. I was dealing with a medical crisis that one of my clients was having. And so that kind of took me off guard, and I was dealing with that for the last 2 hours.
Well, it's great that you came in, even though we've been on for a while. It's great that you came in. And do you have anything else you want to talk about? You want to continue?
It's really sad because I was really hoping to obviously be part of our conversation. We were planning to talk about, I guess my portion was to talk about the Manga Bay story, what's happening with coal in Indonesia. Is that okay if I maybe just tell our audience a little bit about
Absolutely.
that?
You can pick up where I left off because I didn't get into it too deeply. And I knew you
Well,
would have a
it's
better
lost.
perspective.
Let me just start there with all hope is lost.
Stop. Yeah, right. Oh, boy.
So the fossil fuel industry, really the coal industry, is taking off in Indonesia. This industry is obviously, for its investors, paying off quite heavily, which means that we should see long-term investment. The infrastructure they're putting in for the development of coal and fossil fuel use in Indonesia is really set for the next 30 to 40 years. So it's long-term infrastructure in that sense. Unfortunately, these type of projects have the same devastating impacts, around the world as they do in Indonesia. The indigenous population being kicked off their land, losses in biodiversity, stripping down the rainforests. Of course, the local population has to deal with the environmental degradation. And also, this means that Indonesia essentially has opted out of the Paris Accords. But I guess that's actually a general theme here is that, in the United States, Donald Trump has taken a lot of fire internationally for opting out of the Paris Accords verbally. But I would actually have preferred that Donald Trump just say, the hell with the Paris Accords, because then we all know what his agenda is. Whereas other countries, Indonesia, India, elsewhere, are saying they're part of the Paris Accords, but are going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, they're lying.
Okay. And what's happening in Indonesia here is actually really a snapshot of what industrial coal and its development is going to look like across the third world, the developing world.
Yeah, Gene says Indonesia has a huge problem with human rights abuses too.
They absolutely do. You got to remember back in 1970 to 1990, Indonesia annexed East Timor, which is obviously one of the places where they're developing some of these coal hotspots. But the East Timorese population was total 700,000 in 1970 and had shrunk to 200,000 by 1990. By 1999, under Suharto from Indonesia had annexed East Timor to essentially kick the peasants off their land and to rape East Timor of its natural resources. And now, here, 20 years later, reading a story from Manga Bay about how those former lands are now being developed to essentially destroy the rest of the world, why a few investors make fortunes. But that is the state of play in Indonesia. And what we see is that a lot of the same industries, ExxonMobil, Dutch Shell, and there's a lot of actually Chinese industries that are springing up that are driving a lot of this development of fossil fuels as well. So that's another story. The Chinese have bolstered this idea that, oh, we're the lead developer of renewable solar, wind. Well, you're also the lead developer of fossil fuel in developing countries. So that's another part of the discussion that's not being had.
Yeah.
But a lot of these countries are still pursuing a highly intense portfolio of fossil fuels for their energy use. And Indonesia is unfortunately one of the worst examples. And one of the things that we're seeing in Indonesia is that, just for local environmental health quality, air quality is drastically on the decline. And these are not the type of, fourth or fifth generation coal burners like in the United States that have scrubbers in them. These are very, very dirty. So we're going to see a lot of public health impacts as well due to the burning of this low quality, quote unquote, coal. So fortunately, there's been a slight freeze, I guess, if we're talking about air pollution and mentioning COVID-19. And I know we talked a little bit about this last time, but I think what they've showed is that totally, and to put this into some perspective, I think we've seen anywhere between, I think, a 2% global decrease in our CO2 emissions so far. Some countries have seen 20 to 25% decreases in some localized regions and areas. But I think if you want to know what we can learn from this is imagine if all countries exhibited a type of Wuhan or a type of Shenzhen shutdown. In those areas, we saw between 20 to 30% reductions in CO2 emission. Well, if the whole world was to perform those type of shutdowns, that would mean globally we could extrapolate up that we would see about, let's say 25% reduction in global CO2. That would be over a yearly reduction, a massive CO2 reduction. That would be a massive reduction in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. However, if we were to stay locked down for 10 years and did nothing else.
10 years? I'll be dead.
if
I never thought I'd live this long.
If we stayed locked down for 10 years, that would result in an annual reduction of about 2.5% a year. That is less than half of the annual reductions the IPCC is requiring to avert catastrophe by 2030.
Yeah.
So to put this in perspective, as someone who's interested in public policy, that simply means there is nothing on the books then. If not even a shutdown for 10 years would get us on track for the emissions. But assumably, if we did do a shutdown, which we would have to do to
what
keep,
happened to
there's no other
Antonio?
way to have such a rapid decline in emissions. But imagine if we actually did a 10-year shutdown and actually transformed the energy system as well, that we could get about 50% reduction in 10 years if we were to do something like that.
Oh, boy.
So that's one thing the COVID-19 crisis did kind of reveal to climate conscious people is that, there's always been this kind of bombastic idea, well, we can just shut stuff down.
Yeah.
If the politicians don't, we'll just shut stuff down. Well, here's an example of if we actually did shut things down, it would only deliver about a fourth or a fifth of the actual requirement.
It's not going to get us there. No way.
Yeah.
I got hot
It's
off the
depressing,
press
right?
news. I got hot off the press news. I think I'll try to put it back on. Let's see if I can get this. I've lost. So it does look like the movie's being pulled. That and that
Michael Moore's movie.
Yeah, it's getting pulled. I gotta find the latest. Somebody in the chat put it up. Yep, it's coming up. It's coming down. I don't know for some inconsistencies. Burning biomass emits more. Let's see, is not renewable. I don't know exactly what it is, but some people are positive about it, but some people are saying that Michael Moore, let me look. Michael Moore, Apollo. There's always something. I thought the film was good. I mean, I thought it said everything, but oh, okay, here it is. Somebody says, I just received notice that the distributor of Michael Moore's Planet of the Humans is taking the film down due to misinformation in the film. I better download it.
Oh
I think I better
yeah,
download it.
completely. I thought it
Well,
was a really good film. It didn't
that's
pull any
some kind of
punches.
political correctness going on there. I lost the two guys because my internet. Are you there, boys?
Yeah, I'm here.
I'm still here.
All right. Well, I don't have your graphics because I interfered by putting Twitter up. I guess I took too much bandwidth on this
My phone may
overpriced.
die. My phone may die soon, so you might lose me.
All right. Well, we've been on for an hour and 15 minutes. It is a long show. I don't know where Antonio's face is, and I don't know where Nicholas's face is. So
I was gonna say. I was gonna add
assume it'll
just
come
before.
back. Well,
I was gonna add that 2020 might be just based on what Antonio was talking about as far as like the depression that's developing and everything else. It may be a year that you start to see compounding problems hit countries that have up to this point been able to absorb some of the punches of climate change, such as the United States, where you end up with people that are dealing with economic depression, which for individuals would translate into financial depression, where they have no money, can't afford food. You have food distribution problems because of the pandemic impacting meat packing and other food distribution facilities. So people are going to have trouble with getting food. They're going to have trouble with affording anything at all. They're going to, and then they're going to be also hit with severe storms and extreme heat. Maybe they have trouble affording to pay for their electricity, for air conditioning, and other things. You're going to have people losing their homes because of either financial problems or because of destruction from storms, and they're going to be demanding aid and assistance, and they may not get it adequately. I think there might be a lot of compounding problems that start to come together in the developed countries that for now they've been able to largely escape so far. I mean, you see these things happen in the developing world all the time, but nobody here cares about the developing world. It's sad, but it's true. But it's very different when it's happening in our backyard, in our neck of the woods. And I think this year could be the start of that, where you start having compounding variables hitting simultaneously, and individual people starting to get angry, which in some ways would actually be a good thing. People need to start getting a little upset, a little angry over the state of affairs. But it may start to happen because people are going to start to suffer one punch after another punch after another punch, and they're not going to know what to do.
I've been punched for the last year, and it's not a good feeling.
Yeah.
Everybody knows I've been whining about it for the last year, but sometime I'm going to be able to tell the real story. But all right, next, who would like to wrap up this 1 hour and 18-minute lovely discussion? And I want to thank everybody. Richard, Q-Tip Farmers Unite, Copy Cooney. Yeah, I don't know if they pulled it down yet, Copy Cooney, but that's what it said on Twitter. And Twitter. Oh, of course it's right. No, I will follow up on that. And Jill says it's a conspiracy by the toilet paper industrial complex. and yes, Tulsa Doom. She said lies are spread easy by those who don't do their homework. But the thing was about the biofuel Tulsa, I will say, or Tulsa, is that I pulled up any number of articles about it that have gone back and spanned back and said the same thing. I don't know what the whole problem is, but c'est la vie. would like to bring up the rear here? Somebody be the rear admiral.
My
Bring
phone's
up-
about to die, so maybe you could go in, Tony.
Okay.
You didn't have as much talking
Jen
time
and
tonight.
Tony,
Well,
give us the last
I-
word.
I think what Nick is saying is essentially right. The term that I would use to kind of encapsulate his statement is perpetual crisis. That we have entered an era now, an era of perpetual crisis. And I do think that the 2020 or the 2019 or the COVID-19 has kind of ushered in this era now. That we will be moving from crisis to crisis. The shutdowns, food shortages, price shocks, unemployment, healthcare crises will define the 2020s for us. But again, I think ending on an empowering note, a lot of progressives have been feeling quite depressed lately because of what happened with Bernie Sanders in the American primaries. But I think the one kind of catch that comes out of this is the realization that there was never going to be a Messiah or a Savior from on high. That if we want the good to be done, the good people are going to have to do it themselves.
Yeah. Perpetual crisis really does kind of summarize this up. I mean, that's the perfect phrase. And that's exactly what's happening. And we just, from crisis unto crisis, the world opens, you know, and that's where we find ourselves now and probably ongoing, you know.
Well, Heidi ends with thank you, which is very gracious and lovely. And thank you, Environmental Coffeehouse, so much of all of your endeavors to everyone on the team. We lost Nick. I think his phone finally took a poop. So much of all your endeavors to and everyone on the team and everyone contributing in the chats. That's nice. So, good night. Let's all do our peace sign. Antonio, I'm glad that you finally came, and no problem, because we're cool. Nobody's angry, upset. You're here, and you have a beautiful smile. Jennifer, beautiful smile, and so does Nick. This is a beautiful smile, team. I will put on a little tiny little vid and say good night.